This is our second in a series of business transformation focused discussions that we've run over the last 6 months. And the last time we were together, there were a couple of recommendations that we've incorporated into the program today. One is to talk a little bit more about the theory of business transformation. And secondly, really focus in on some real life examples of some of the work we've been doing together in the market with our partner Cisco. So in our agenda today, we'll do a quick introduction. We'll get into the theory of how to transform. Then we're going to get into the meat of the presentation, which are some of the real life examples of what organizations have done to transform. And then obviously, once you've kind of set the table about theory and some examples, what kind of next steps? Where do you go from here? And what we're going to try and do is cover that material in about 45 minutes. And we've asked the team at the Petroleum Club to start serving lunch, which is a buffet at the back, in about 50 minutes from now. So please enjoy yourselves. And I hope you find the material informative, and I hope this is a productive use of time. Because we have guests across the country, Luke is going to take and monitor for any questions in real time. And because it is a live webinar, if we have any technical challenges, even though we're a technology company, you can never plan these things. Please bear with us and we'll work our way through those. And at the end, which is probably why most of you are here, way more than the material, is we're giving away a draw prize, which is that amazing F1 Lego vehicle at the back. And I can see lots of you nodding already. So, ultimately, as we get through the material today, you're going to have the chance to earn that draw. And by the way, if you're online with us as part of the webinar, your names will go into the draw too. So it's not exclusive that you have to be here in Calgary and joined us because of the weather. It's absolutely my pleasure today to introduce not only myself, but the rest of our team. My name is Mark George. I'm the Vice President of Charter, and my responsibility is to lead our business transformation practice and ultimately also have the responsibility to lead our business across the prairies in Western Canada. One of my colleagues joining me today is Wade Crick. Wade is the principal business architect for Charter, and obviously will share a number of projects that he's been working on tied to our business architecture practice. Our guest today is Roland Plett. Roland and I work across the country together every day. He's the energy and mining lead for Cisco within the energy solutions practice. And Roland, thanks so much for joining us today. Last but not least is one of my colleagues, Ronnie Scott. Ronnie's our Chief Technology Officer. And as you can appreciate, he's going to add another dimension to the discussion today as we work through our presentation. So, what's the first thing you need to know about transformation? It's hard work. Not only is it hard work, but it requires innovation, it requires obsession, and it requires passion. And it requires those things not from a small group of people, but from the whole organization. And what we're going to try and kind of set the table on for you today is when you think about business transformation, you need the whole organization to embrace change. You can't be afraid to kind of challenge your own thinking about these things. You've got to have a reasonably high appetite for risk. And we're going to talk some more about that as we get into the presentation. And I can assure you that business transformation is not for the faint of heart. Now, what are some of the drivers? So last fall in our roadshow, we talked about 8 business drivers. We talked about growing your business either in new products and services or in new geographic markets. We talked about business continuity, that what's my business need to look like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now so that you remain competitive and viable. And we're going to develop that topic more fully today. One other thing I'll just point out quickly is that in business transformation, yes, it's tied to an organization. Doesn't matter whether you're a large corporation or a small, medium business. Doesn't matter whether you're a not-for-profit or you're in the public sector. At the end of the day, you have stakeholders, you have customers, you have employees. If you have private equity investors, they have an influence on why you should transform. And ultimately, those drivers are what you need to consider as you build your transformational program. There are 3 components then that we talked about relative to business transformation. The first one is people, that you have to have the right pool of people, the right resources in the right place at the right time. Then from a process point of view, you've got to ensure that you have the operational policies and procedures in place. If you're an executive, you have a board, what is the governance that you need to have in place? And how do you have all the sustainable processes that are functioning to be able to support that change? And then comes technology. Kind of an interesting message from a couple of technology companies. But at the end of the day, the key components are, and we're going to develop this, are people, process, and technology. So, what is the driving question for our presentation today? How do you make your organization, sustainable over the long term? So it's kind of an interesting question. And as we were thinking about the material for today, we realized something very, very, very quickly. The answer to that question is not binary. It's not a yes or a no. The other complexity is there's no standard or common definition of the word sustainable. So maybe as we get started, there's some questions that we need to think about as we look at these ideas of how do I make my organization sustainable over the long term? So it was just the Masters golf tournament over the weekend. And whether you're a golfer or not, you probably saw it on one of the channels, especially if you're a sports nut. And one of the more famous people that was involved in the Masters over the years is Arnold Palmer. And I've lost my slide. Excuse me. Did you see it? There he is. So Arnold Palmer. Probably not the best picture to choose of Arnold, but clearly representative of the fact that he made a quote that really made me think about business transformation, and that the road to success is always under construction. Hard to believe a golfer would say that. But at the end of the day, we thought it was appropriate for our presentation today, because ultimately all of your organizations are being impacted by geopolitical tensions, shifts in supply chain, labor skill shortages, capital availability, cyber risks, and it's all about what's your level of tolerance for risk. And all of those things come into play when you start to generate or analyze risk. So, as I said, I want to start with a definition. Business transformation to Charter and Cisco talks about making fundamental changes to how an organization runs. It's a combination of people, process, and technology, and it is a true pivot. But what I want to show you shortly is that you can make a slight change and it's still a pivot. You don't have to jump all the way to one spectrum and make a radical change. Business transformation involves digital. transformation. In fact, it's almost like it's part of the DNA. And sustainable comes up as viability, and I referred to that earlier. It talks about the quality products and services, and it's not short term, it's long term. How do you sustain your organization to be competitive and provide quality products and services over the long term? So here's the model that Deloitte built. And you can look at any of the big four firms. You can look at what McKinsey's produced. You can look at what Accenture's produced. So we're not embracing or endorsing Deloitte's model, but it is interesting and helps support some of the theory today. That ultimately, if you looked at level zero, you have the same business model. You have the same capabilities. You basically have the same people working in the same markets. And all you're doing is digitizing some small piece of your company, whether it's to access internal data or improve a process that may be broken today. But it's an incremental change, is an incremental reduction in cost or an incremental improvement in operational excellence. And as we're trying to depict here, you go from level 0 to level 2, where all of a sudden you're trying to make more change. And jump all the way to level 4, which is radical business transformation. It talks about entirely new markets and new products and or fundamental change in how a business profits. That's going to require a new operating model. It's likely going to require a new org structure and new people. And it's going to be a radically changed approach to the market you are in today, or maybe into a new adjacent market as you build your company. Now, across the world of our attendees today, we have multiple industries being represented. And what we understand and we've experienced in working with our clients in these industries is there's radically different approaches to what transformation can look at. In the energy space, where a lot of you are with us today in the room there's a huge investment in IoT technology. And in order to incorporate that into the traditional IT and OT world, you've got to be spending at the edge where they link together. And we're going to talk about that as one of our examples. If you jump over to the other side and you're in the government and public sector, you're much more worried about wireless technologies, data analytics. How are you helping your customers? How are you supporting your employees? So let's drill down just quickly on this idea of ER&I. Energy, resources, which is mining, industrials being manufacturing. And what's absolutely interesting in the data is that their primary driver to transforming is their operating margin. These are their top 5 measurements. But look at the 5th one, sustainability. Because they're thinking about how do I support my clients that are transforming themselves and moving from traditional oil and gas into the renewable or energy renewable marketplace. If then you skip to the next one and look at government and public sector, very different set of KPIs. The top one being still the notion of a financial metric, budget versus actual. But at the end of the day, they're also concerned about productivity and supporting their clients. And why are they worried about that? Because as infrastructure moves to the cloud, many organizations, particularly in the government and public sector, have a growing backlog of application functionality that requires to be updated, or in our terms, modernized, so that they can better support their customers, engage their employees, and deal with asset optimization. At Charter, we have a practice dedicated to app modernization. And if you're interested in that, Sean Ovenden's at the back. He's the director of that part of our practice. And not only is helping clients, but charters in the middle of business transforming. We're updating some of our applications, and many of them we built from scratch. And so we can't afford to do that anymore, or we're going to not be able to support and scale our business. So that ultimately, where do you start? You start by thinking big. You come up with a plan. But you don't have to, you can start at level 0 versus level 5. In our series of podcasts that we've been doing and executing, we talk about think big, start small, scale fast. But here's the thing, the most important point is benchmarking, and we're going to talk more about that as we get through the material. So for everyone in the room and from our listening audience, this is all about learning from others' experience. The things you're going to hear us talk about today are industry agnostic. There is no one approach to business transformation, and it applies equally to large companies and to small companies. So the first case example that I'm going to kick off today is in the oil and gas industry, and in fact, an oil field service company. The list of problem statements looks overwhelming. And I can assure you that we never started out with a list when we started working together. But at the end of the day, we've built this amazing collaborative effort on business transformation. The first driver was that they had one person with domain expertise that was close to retirement. How do we replace that skill? They had a new business idea that they needed to scale quickly and do it over multiple geographic boundaries. They wanted to make it themselves easier to do business with for their clients. And at the end of the day, their clients are in energy transition, and they want to be able to help them with sustainability measurements and emissions reduction. So how did we do that? We started first with a business architect engagement. We leveraged the notion of design thinking. We defined very clearly, both inside the company and outside the company with customers and other stakeholders, what the business outcomes were for the organization. We defined what the personas or the user experience needed to look like, and we helped them build a roadmap to digital transformation. Then we set out to build a predictive model that focused on the new business idea. We created a digital twin that allowed us to perform assessments and generate reports. We used low code, no code in 2-week sprints to fast track the deliverables. We designed and created a new field application. Ultimately, we thought about data strategy because there were so many sources of data, both inside the company and outside the company, that they needed to come up with a warehouse strategy to deal with that. And then ultimately, looking at the idea of how do we service our customers better? What kind of an ERP-like application do we need? What kind of dashboards do we need? And more importantly, for the first time ever, start to take an enterprise view of the data from all the different sources, IT, IoT, and OT. So like I said, you can start wherever you feel comfortable on the level list from 0 to 4. You can do incremental change or radical change. And it doesn't all happen at once. This is a progress report. We're in the process right now of testing the predictive model with clients and prospects. We're in the process right now of looking at the new field application, how it's going to support the field teams. How does a remote company like ours support the field people that are in the middle of nowhere, just trying to do their job effectively? How do we align the field teams and the headquarter teams? And at the end of the day, for an organization that doesn't have a traditional IT department, how does somebody like Charter support and run that business 24/7 by 365 as they expand to other geographies, not only in North America, but eventually beyond that? So here's our first example today. I'd now like to ask Wade Crick to join me and come up and talk about the next set of use cases that we're proud to share with you today. Thank you, Wade.
So I have two use cases I want to share with you that are built around the idea of convergence. So convergence is taking information technology and operational technology and combining them together so they work as a single enterprise solution. And so why would you even care about doing that? Because traditionally, what happens over in the carpeted space, the office space, versus the industrial space, the plant space, the uncarpeted space has somewhat been siloed. But as we've moved into this new era of Industry 4.0, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Industry 4.0 in my next slide, it's been more and more important to do convergence of these two capabilities. So some of the reasons to think about converging OT and IT is to drive automation of work. So if you're over in the carpeted space in the office side, you can look for things that you do that are paper-based or in Excel spreadsheets. So there's always opportunity to take some of those workflows and actually improve them by doing something with better tools. If you're over in the industrial side, and I'm from Edmonton, in Edmonton we have a lot of fabrication shops. So I don't think it's any surprise to anybody here that we have a shortage of skilled labor in Alberta. So there's something like 20,000 different skilled people needed in Alberta just for the current kind of industrial projects we have. So fabrication is a relatively low margin business. Typically margins about 12, 13, 14%. So in Edmonton, because it's very difficult to get welders as an example, you find companies are now investing in CNC plasma cutters and cobot welding machines so that they can automate some of these business processes in the factory. Also look at connecting the unconnected to the cloud, because once you get into your data into the cloud, you have all sorts of analytics you can do. And in the industrial space, over in the uncarpeted side, IoT data represents a huge amount of data, and almost none of it gets actually used for analytics. But 90% of it's unused. So it's a great opportunity to take that unused data and do more analytics with it. And of course, we've gone through a period here of people working from home, doing hybrid work and so on. And you got to think about how you make that better for your employees. So thinking about, the workspace and how you do more of a blended work where people come into the physical office. And you're probably maybe looking at downsizing your physical footprint. So one of my use cases is a company that is actually looking at doing that. And then, of course, as you take and connect more and more devices, both in the carpeted and uncarpeted space to the internet, you now have a larger exposure to cyber risk. It's a very serious issue that has to be dealt with. And the good news is there are great tools out there, great processes and so on, great frameworks to use to mitigate your cyber risk. Certainly in the industrial space, it's recognized by governments that the industrial processes need to be protected. So in Canada, as an example, we have a new bill coming out that should get signed into law here somewhere this spring or summer, Bill C-26, which takes and gives the government the ability to come in and look at what you're doing as a business and potentially declare that your business is critical infrastructure, and then examine what you're doing from a cybersecurity perspective. So the Internet of Things is everywhere. It's at the airport, it's the roadways, it's the vehicles on the roadways, it's the trucks on the roadways, it's the warehouses, it's the plants, it's in agriculture. John Deere as a company is spending billions of dollars investing in precision agriculture to drive better outcomes for farmers. It's in the equipment manufacturing space. So if you're Caterpillar or Komatsu, all of that heavy equipment you're now selling into the market is connected. So you can know how the equipment gets used. So you can know, predict when certain things might fail, so you can prevent breakages. And usually the interface to all of this is an app on a smartphone. So that is your gateway into the visibility of all of this. And just as a point around the IT market versus the IoT market, in 2024, the IT market that we're probably all very familiar with is going to grow at a rate of about 6.2%. The IoT market is growing at about a rate of 17%. So it's about 3 times the growth rate. So that goes, I think, to show that there's a lot of opportunity for connecting the unconnected for businesses. And that's why there's such a large growth rate. So Industry 4.0 is the new model of how you take and get a lot more value out of what happens with your industrial data. Industry 4.0 was introduced in 2011 at the Hanover Automation Fair in Germany. The German government was very interested in improving the manufacturing processes in Germany. Obviously, Germany is a leader in manufacturing. And so that model is very data-centric. So core capabilities are data analytics, which enable new capabilities for the business. So it could be creating a digital twin, so you have a model of your business process. It could be, as Mark pointed out, a digital twin of a critical subject matter expert in your business. Could also be a model of the process, so that when you're training somebody on the actual process in a refinery, you're not doing the training on the physical refinement, but you're training on the model. Could also be enabling a automotive technician working for Porsche is trying to troubleshoot Mark's Porsche, and he's having difficulty, so he has augmented reality glasses on, and the German engineer looks over his shoulder virtually and helps him troubleshoot the car. So there's many, many use cases for Industry 4.0. And originally it started out as a new model for doing manufacturing, optimizing manufacturing by using data as a new asset. And you can see now that every vertical has taken up Industry 4.0. So there's an education 4.0, utility 4.0, energy 4.0, healthcare 4.0. Every vertical has their version of this. The big automation fair is running next week in Hanover, Germany. And every vendor that's there, including Cisco, will be talking about their version of Industry 4.0. Emerson will be there, Rockwell, and so on. They all have their version of how they're doing this. So of course, at Charter, working with Cisco, we're very interested in helping our customers drive IoT and OT convergence to bring benefit to the businesses. We're also working on sustainability, providing designs that help drive forward more sustainable solutions. And then finally, these are all data-driven decisions. Data is the new oil. And so you want to maximize your use of that data set, the data set you have available, both from the real-time world and the IT world, to get better results. And Cisco has a very rich capability in all of this, with network capabilities, sensor capabilities, security in particular, which is highly important these days. And one of our partners, in addition to what we're doing with Cisco, is a company out of Australia called PlaceOS. So they take all of the capabilities that Cisco provides with wireless and so the software stack that Cisco has, and adds more capabilities around analytics for physical buildings. So those physical buildings, you can track the energy usage in the building, you can track where people are, you can optimize your use of spaces. And that's one of the use cases, one of the customer examples we're working on today. So we're working with a utility that has 3,000 employees. They've got 150 buildings and they've got 31 industrial plants. And their business objectives are to consolidate from 14 buildings to 4. They want to make better data-driven decisions around whether they should renovate their buildings, buy or lease buildings. They want to improve the work experience because they're going from traditional physical spaces down to more shared spaces with like hoteling type experience and so on. So they want to make sure that what they do is being meeting the needs of the employees. And of course, they want to improve building efficiency. So they want to measure the uses of the spaces and make sure that it's being optimized from an energy perspective. And then most importantly, they want to drive better results for worker safety. So the stakeholders we're working with here, again, going back to people, process, and technology, the people we're working with are the plant managers, the facilities managers, human resources, the safety managers, and IT. And the processes we're looking at optimizing are how they acquire or lease buildings, how they do facility bookings. So that would include parking along with the physical spaces, the shared spaces. Improving plant safety, so knowing where people are in the plants, and if they have an emergency in a plant and they have to have people collect at the muster stations, they want to make sure that everybody that was in those physical plants is at the muster station. So they want to be very efficient at that, and of course, plant safety along with tracking of assets. So assets that they want to track would be things like tools and also equipment, along with just human resources. So the technology that's being used to deliver this would be Wi-Fi, asset tagging, Cisco Spaces for the software, PlaceOS for the software, and then also integrating in with the Honeywell building control systems so that we know how energy is being used, and we can also control how energy is being heating and cooling, et cetera, in various parts of the buildings. So here's some of the key performance indicators that will be tracked, again, around business outcomes. So tracking real estate costs, the space utilization, energy costs, and then the overall overall equipment efficiency number, OEE. That's a very common metric in the industrial space. So if you have plants, you're manufacturing and so on, you should know what your OEE number is. We want to track the safety instances. And then, of course, because this will be impacting employees, you want to also do employee satisfaction score tracking. And the outcomes will be reduced OPEX from the amount of physical real estate being used, energy gains, energy efficiency gains, and the ESG rating will be improved along with hopefully zero safety workplace incidents or anything to do with worker safety. The other use case I want to share with you is the Inuit Energy Security Project. So this is a very unique project that is in the Arctic. And the business here is to build a plant in the Arctic that is going to take natural gas and convert it to propane, compressed natural gas, and synthetic diesel. So the outcomes out of this will be energy security for the North. As I'm sure you can imagine the cost of getting fuel into the North. It's very expensive, right? You either bring it in by the ocean, you bring it up the Mackenzie River, or you truck it in, or if it's really a crisis, you're flying in with a 737. So those are all expensive ways to get fuel into the North. The other things that this will do, this plant, when it's up and running, will of course create local jobs and create new businesses for the North. So again, people, process, and technology, the people we're working with are the Indigenous communities, the community leaders, also the people that are working on the design of the plant, the operational technology people, and then the regulator, which plays a very important role, is the Canada Energy Regulator. The processes that we're looking at building for this, of course, would be the plant operations, industrial control systems, safety, human resources, and training. There will be, it's fair to say there'll be lots of challenges with staffing this plant. We'll have 16 operators running the plant. Of course, the goal is to also provide a remote control center capability out of Calgary. So you can have remote operations, but due to regulatory constraints, you have to have people at the plant. If you're going to run, you can't run autonomously for any length of time without physical people. And then, of course, the supply chain optimization is another big area of opportunity, because to supply parts for this plant, the typical supply chain would be out of Edmonton or Calgary to get like a new valve or motor or whatever you might need into the plant. So you want to make sure you've optimized all of this. If there's something that breaks, you want to be able to predict what might fail before it fails. You have it at the site. And of course, the technology involved here will be the industrial control system, the business system. So we're the strategic advisor for both the IT and the OT side of this business. So we're also working on things like ERP, CRM, the common kind of business applications, along with the operational technology systems. And then, of course, this will connect to the cloud, because there'll be a lot of opportunity to do analytics, advanced analytics in the cloud. And, doing things like a remote control center, you really do need access to the cloud for that. And possibly doing things like a digital twin for them and so on, so you can emulate what's happening in the north by doing something here in Calgary and testing things. And then finally, of course, cybersecurity is an important capability here. It's an industrial plant. Again, it has to be secure. So that's two examples of opportunities we're working on that are in flight. They're not completed yet, but they're exciting opportunities, and we're happy to share more with you if you would like. And the KPIs, again, measuring what are the business outcomes. We're going to measure energy cost. There ought to be obviously savings there, because you're not now trucking or barging diesel up into the north. We're going to measure the OEE number for the plant. World-class OEE is 85%, and this is a greenfield, so one would hope you would get close to 85% on that number. And then safety instances. So on the safety side, hopefully 0 incidents. And then environmental and community impact, so measure the number of jobs created, the impact, and there should be hopefully no environmental incidents. I can assure you the regulator will be watching very carefully for any environmental missteps. And then the outcomes, of course, will be energy security for the north, local jobs, upskilling Inuit community, and the ESG, environmental, social, and governance rating should be world-class, along with 0 safety incidents, of course. And by the way, this plant is expected to run for 50 years, so it has a very long life. Roland.
Can you hear me? I think I turned this thing on, so. Good. Awesome. This is always fun to work with Charter on these kinds of events and working with Charter customers. So thanks for the invitation, Mark, to join you. I happen to be from Calgary, so I was saying to someone earlier, it's almost a bit of a treat to be able to actually leave my office and come downtown. It's not something I take for granted, being on calls all day long with people around the world. But what I'd like to do today is actually share a little bit of what I talk to people about around the world, and some of the use cases that I see that fit into what Mark and Wade and Ronnie are talking about today. two really important pillars that have already been mentioned by both Mark and Wade, really around financial optimization, and then the optimization of the sort of social equity that your customer or that you have with your stakeholders, and both of those are really important. You can't do business with one optimized and the other one not, right? And so that's starting to mean different things. And more, what I'm finding is the customers I'm talking to, both in energy and in mining, have made public declarations on the social side of things around sustainability. And that means different things for different people. It used to primarily mean people safety and relationship with the community. Now it's also meaning talking about our relationship with environmental metrics as well. And so as I go through the use cases, I'll highlight some of those things. Generally speaking, there's sort of two categories of use cases that I talk to people about. One is really around digitizing operations, which Mark and Wade both introduced brilliantly. And then the other piece is really around connecting the people that are actually out in the field. And this becomes a lot more important as some of the expertise starts to consolidate in central operation centers. And we're seeing this across all of the industries, and especially in mining and in energy, we're seeing more and more of that. As Mark indicated, people are harder to find to have the expertise to cover off all of the things that need to be done in the field. And so more and more what we're finding is the true experts that have the experience are starting to consolidate around operation centers, and the people in the field rely on those remote experts to guide them through some of the steps in the field. And so these two pieces kind of work hand in hand. Now, underneath that, as you become more digitized, the two aspects that keep coming up are: how are you working through the energy transition components? So as fossil fuels become a bigger part of the sustainability equation, how do you shift towards more electrical or hydrogen-based operations? And then the other piece is how do you secure the digital infrastructure that you're expanding? So in order to be able to centralize and build more remote capability, to centralize expertise and to save on travel costs and all of those things that you're impacting by pulling people centrally, you are opening yourself up to more risk for other people kind of intercepting that attack surface that you're opening up with digitization. And so security becomes a really, really critical conversation in partnership with a digitization conversation. So all four of these kind of work together and really become a really critical piece of every use case in your organization. Now, I've given you one example here of a use case map that we call Portfolio Explorer. I have, at Cisco, I'm part of an industry solutions group, and we cover off 11 different industry verticals, and oil and gas is one of those. Starting to transition this more to the idea of energy, just because a lot of oil and gas companies are diversifying into other forms of energy in the new forms of business that Mark talked about, right? I tend not to hang out a lot in the sandbox technology side of things. It's an interesting conversation to see what your priorities are in terms of new things you're exploring. But very quickly, I like to turn the conversation more towards proven use cases across the industry. And so all the 11 verticals that we represent in the industry solutions team have this kind of a portfolio explorer of different use cases that we actually see implemented in the marketplace that are actually moving the needle, both from a financial optimization perspective and a social optimization perspective, okay? So these are things that are actually happening. You can find these on cisco.com in our industry pages. And I have a short link up at the top for the oil and gas one, but all of the other industries are in that same spot, right? So if you're not in the oil and gas industry, that's one place where you can come across all of these use cases. I want to highlight a couple of examples, and then I want to hand it over to Ronnie to kind of wrap things up here with some observations as well. Wade talked about digital twin. There's a bunch of technologies under that. Digitization kind of introduced this idea of being able to replicate your real environment with a digital representation, right? I think that's getting supercharged now with all of the discussion around AI, right? So it used to be you could represent what was happening out there, but your analytics and your insights were still mostly coming from your experts. And they still need to be validated by experts, but now you have a lot of horsepower in behind that with AI engines that are learning about your operation and are able to identify patterns that even the experts sometimes can't recognize. And there are ways to do that that are specific and protect your IP, but still take advantage of recognizing those patterns within your operation. And Charter does a great job of walking through those things with you. And Ronnie can take us through some more of that. But digital twin is kind of that holy grail, if you wish, of digitization, right? Underneath that, there's a number of different aspects to digitization, probably the simplest of which is predictive maintenance, where we now are taking more and more data points from rotating assets and other assets that can predict when things are starting to go sideways, and you're able to actually schedule maintenance rather than react to failures, right? This has been growing in momentum for a number of years, but still big opportunity here in a lot of industrial environments. Condition monitoring in places you wouldn't think you could condition monitor, right? Most of you recognize this as a floating roof storage type of system that's obviously seen a little bit of rust. But these are the kind of facilities that we can now wrap with fiber optic cable and actually recognize when there's deformation that's happening in parts of the tank and digitally actually recognize this without actual physical inspection. Sometimes physical inspection is still needed, but what we can do with digitization is actually reduce that requirement and actually monitor some of that remotely, right? Places that you wouldn't necessarily see, right? Until recently, there were still a lot of oil wells, and still are, that are actually not connected and not being monitored remotely, still relying on people driving around with trucks and clipboards and taking down notes. That can be reduced. We're not eliminating inspections, but can we reduce that down to save travel costs, to save travel impact from a sustainability perspective, all increasing capabilities there, right? One of the things that Cisco is really becoming quite passionate about now that we've acquired a company called Splunk is really moving up the stack from a digital analytics perspective and being able to take multiple data platforms and tie them together into insights that were difficult to do in a general sense before, right? So you'll see more from that going forward as well. Some of you saw us at the Global Energy Show last year, and we'll be back again this year. And you saw some of the tools that we have around enabling field workers to be able to leverage over-the-shoulder coaching that Wade talked about, right? We can take that one step further and actually integrate that into workflow modernization, okay? And then on the security front, probably the biggest use case there is around actually identifying your asset base and being able to understand what is the list of assets we have out there. And because it's impossible to really understand your risk profile unless you have a good solid inventory. And we can do a lot of that automatically by understanding what digital conversations are happening on the network. I'm going to leave it at that. Why is this not? We have a lot of standard for infrastructure design that we tested and worked with customers on, and that work with the Charter team to build up expertise in various levels. I'm going to leave it there and hand it over to Ronnie to take us home. You ready to go, Ronnie?
Yeah, one moment. Good timing for a problem.
Well, we already apologized up front if we have a technology.
Oh, there we go. So we're covered with the technology pieces.
And Roland, if you wouldn't mind just sharing with everybody that you started a bit late. We'll probably run over.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mark.
And apologize.
I'll repeat that for the people online. Since we started running a little bit late with the program here, but as soon as Ronnie has some of the technical stuff sorted out here, he's gonna share some of his practice with us as well. Maybe while we're waiting, what I will say, we're back. Yeah. Awesome. Probably the industry that I've seen lead most in a lot of this remote operations piece is the mining industry, and we're starting to see that more in Canada, and I expect that will grow. Right, in West Australia, they've been doing that for quite a long time. BHP, I think, is running 5 different mines out of one operation center and across all of West Australia. And it's actually fascinating to go onto the floor of their operation center and see, oh, this mine is operating over here, this mine is operating over here. And the experts can actually go between mining operations without actually leaving the floor, right? Very, very powerful.
Okay, thank you very much, Roland and Mark and Wade. So we're going to finish out the session with the big question of, well, what does this mean for you? How do you apply this to your business? Where do you think of next? Where do you go next? And so we're just going to run through a little bit of how you might want to be thinking about and taking this forward inside your world. So going back to our previous presentation again, one of the important things about any form of transformation, business, digital transformation, is it's all about the outcomes. And the question is, well, what are the outcomes we're talking about? And typically it is recognized that there are 4 outcomes that encompass the kinds of things that will make your business more reactive, more responsive, give better value to your shareholders, whatever that be. And these are them. How do I make my company more agile, responsive to changes, to business needs, and so on? How do I give better experiences to any of my stakeholders, my staff, my employees, my customers, anyone? How do I scale my business? And not just up, not just get bigger, but how do I respond when the business changes and I want to scale something down and move my focus? And finally, how do I make my business more resilient? Now that could be obviously dealing with ransomware, but it can be backups, it can be disaster recovery, it can be just responding to the industry. So these are the things we're going to use, as Mark talked about, to benchmark our success. Is our business able to achieve these objectives? So it would be silly of us to go through a whole presentation and not fill out your buzzword bingo and give you AI as part of the day's message. And it is important to note that the whole idea of business and digital transformation does evolve and it changes over time. So right now we've seen artificial intelligence step in and become a big part of the conversation that's out there. But let's be clear, artificial intelligence and machine learning and deep learning and all these things, these are almost 2 decades old, maybe even further. But right now, we've seen an entire change in perception of artificial intelligence due largely in part to generative AI, taking us from the place where we had to have data scientists and intelligent people do all the work to the point where anybody can ask a question and move forward. So this does allow us to accelerate transformation in a new way, but it is still just a tool. It is not an end game. It is not the outcome. It is a tool to get you to the outcome. And so when we talk about that, we talk about the Copilot effect, or whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's any of these generalized generative AI solutions. These are tools that can provide more information to your users at an accelerated rate. But generally, they are broad, open, wide sets of data that sometimes can be out of date, that sometimes might be inaccurate, that sometimes might not reflect or provide the privacy that you want to engage. So we see Microsoft providing multiple different instances and styles of Copilot, ones that help you code, ones that answer questions about what's on the internet, ones that look at your own internal data and sees what's been happening in your email for the last couple of weeks. And I've been playing in there and looking and seeing what they're doing, and these are useful tools, but they don't really change your business until we start applying them to outcomes, and we'll get back to that. But the flip side is Microsoft and the Copilots and the ChatGPTs of the world are very much coming from the perspective of, let's take all your data, throw it into a big concrete mixer, spin it around a bit and hope the results are good. And what we find is that companies come to us, and we're already talking to health organizations who are saying, we're thinking about this, we're wanting to learn about this, but we don't want to put private data into a public system. And there are reasons you may not want to do that. So we are also talking to organizations who are saying, what if I can build my own instance? How hard is this? And we've been working with Cisco and dealing with, there's a great resource here in Canada, Patrick, who I've worked with closely over the years. And he's been looking at building a deployment where we can put an AI environment in your premises with only your data in it and build up a chatbot in hours that has your data and your information and shares that with your organization. But again, powerful though it is, it's just a tool. So AI, I want to position here, is a valuable asset. You shouldn't ignore it. You should be thinking, how does it apply to my business? Or how come do I not want to apply it? But make business decisions based on where we're going now, which is all about the outcomes. So Mark's already introduced us to this. Think big, start small, scale first, and benchmark. Great, awesome. Well, what does that really mean, and how is that practically going to apply to my business? Well, let me give you an example. So let's talk about this idea of thinking big. And it's all about changing the mindset away from the technology to the outcome. Thinking big, big ideas. What are the outcomes? And some of the use cases we've talked about earlier that we're going to reflect on from Roland and Wade and what Mark has been talking about, these actually started not with the technology, but with the outcome. So let's think about health. If you're in health, the question isn't, do I need device tracking hardware? Or do I need artificial intelligence? Or should I be deploying this kind of telecommunications? The question is, what do my patients, what do my doctors, what do my nurses need to do to give better health outcomes? Totally different question. And so if we talk about health and we get into this thing, it's very easy for me as a technologist to go to a technologist in a health organization and say, hey, let's talk about virtual health. Let's talk about webcams. Let's talk about communications. Let's talk about getting your doctors the ability to telecommute with patients around the world. Well, that's great. It's awesome. But is it achieving the outcome that you really want, which is better outcomes for your patients? If you build it just because it seems like a cheap way of saving costs, that can be beneficial, but it may not give you the outcomes your patients need. And how many times have we seen software programs and projects come out and deploy exactly what they said they would, but not offer any value to your environment? And so what we want to do is turn around and say, well, what is the outcome? Can we give patients who are constrained and unable to leave their homes a better experience by putting them in touch with doctors who are hundreds of kilometers away? Well, absolutely. But to do that, it's not about just putting up a webcam. And yes, we can do that with Zoom and we can do part of that. But the more detailed the experience, the better the communication stream and so on, the better the experience is for the patient. And we saw that in the middle of the pandemic where it was quick to do, but you got better and better at it as we learned how to do it properly. And likewise, if we begin to think about, well, not just how do I connect these two together, but how do I create a digital front door experience? How do I get my patients to the right specialist faster? How do I redirect my patients to the nearest hospital when a given hospital can't open its doors for a disaster? How do I communicate with these people in real time? How do I get my people the services they need? Those are interesting questions. And behind them, there will be many, many answers to those questions. And technology, yes, will be part of it. But process and people will be just as important. So then we move on to the start small. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that maybe instead of going and producing some massive artificial intelligence application and having you get a small server and put a GPU in it and fire it up and see if it actually does provide outcomes that are useful. And likewise, if we're going to use video conferencing, and we saw this again in the pandemic, we just did whatever we could, right? We get an iPad, we get a piece of software, we connect it up and we see recordings. And we can fall into this thing of, well, we have to plan out all the phases of the project up front. But really, what we need to do is we need to learn as we go, fail fast. That means sometimes it's not going to work how you want. We iterate. Try something different. Once you've got a solution that is working, once you have something that's going to make life better for your customers, your stakeholders, your users, then we can start talking about scaling it up. So if any of you know what this boat here is, this is an America's Cup boat from Team New Zealand, my home country. This is my sport of choice. And this has been an interesting example of business transformation. America's Cup is the oldest sporting trophy in the world. Back in the 1800s, the Americans have held it away from the British for over 150 years. And then New Zealand and Australia got involved. And they upset the apple cart well and truly, totally changed the game. And after 150 years of basically the same boats going around in circles, this has turned into the fastest developing sport, equivalent to that of Formula One, where we've gone from old boats to massive superboats to catamarans and now this. And if you don't know what this is a hydrofoiling boat. It's got foil on one side and foil on the stern, keeping it up out of the water. It is literally flying. They don't call it sailing, they call it flight control. And this has been developed over the space of 15 years, from classic boating to now this. And every one of those things, how can they respond to what the sports fans are expecting? We need agility. We need better experiences. We need more scale. We want to get this around the world. And we want resiliency. We want boats that are going to last, that are going to provide really good, interesting outcomes. But interestingly, the boat itself needs those exact four same things. The boat itself needs to be agile. The boat itself needs to provide a great experience for the crew to be able to sail this thing. It is hard to sail it. The boat itself needs to scale from what used to be small little catamarans to now 75-foot yachts flying across the water above 1 to 2 feet above the water. And of course, resilience. These boats have to hold together with speeds in excess of 90 kilometers an hour. So this is a whole change in how we do things. And it's all computerized. It's all digital. It's all based in computers. Have we got a camera problem? Yeah. Cool. Sorry about that. Carry on. You've seen us most of the event. All of this requires you to know what's going on. You have to benchmark every step of the way. You have to say, is this working? Is this data good? Are the outcomes what my users want?
And have I got the processes to make sure it's in place? It is not about the piece of software, it's about the people, the process, and the technology working together as a whole. That's where you work as teams, you work together, you don't do this alone. And you keep coming back to the outcomes. Now, we can talk about what Wade was talking about earlier, things like PlaceOS. And we can talk about this wonderful application that provides a nice screen that allows us to manage the environment, get people in the right rooms, track who's using what, or we can care about the people who walk in the front door. What's more important? And I suggest it's the people who walk in the front door. And likewise, sustainability. We can talk all we want about water flows and pressure and keeping buildings running and environments happy, but what's more important? Building systems and the management systems, or building a nice, clean environment for our work. I suggest sustainability itself is more important than the tech. And of course, as we get into health, better outcomes for people is more important than tracking a bed. If a bed allows us, with a tracker on it, allows us to provide a better service to our people, excellent. If it allows a nurse to spend less time wandering down corridors trying to find a wheelchair, excellent. But if we've got this tool in place and it's sitting in a wheelchair and the nurse doesn't know how to use it, or can't access it, or can't find the chair, then you've wasted time, effort, and money. So we keep coming back to the outcome, the people, and the results. Charter itself, in its mission statement, which we've had for a long time, it's always said, we're driven to inspire and help you achieve your goals and aspirations. Goals and aspirations. Not to give you another Wi-Fi access point, not to give you another route, but to help and inspire you achieve your goals and objectives. And we're happy to sit down with you to talk about what those are, to bring people like Wade in and do business architecture and try and find out, and then to bring in our partners like Cisco to come down, build a solution that meets goals and objectives. So I'm going to hand back to Mark to finish out. So I'm hoping audio is working if the camera's not. It is. Okay, good. Camera's been shutting down on it.
So ultimately, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. Either you're in the audience with us or online. We appreciate you investing the time to have the opportunity to hear some of our business transformation messaging. But most importantly, I'd refer you to a couple of things. One is all of the presentation material is online, because each of you may need to incorporate some of the ideas within your own organization to cut and paste. There's a QR code on the bottom of our handout. And of course, this is also online. Feel free to capture that. It will refer you to the checklist, but as important, Ronnie, myself, Wade, and Roland are fully available to answer any questions post this event. We put our email addresses, we put our phone numbers on here, and we'd encourage you to feel free to reach out to us. And again, it's my pleasure to welcome all of you. And if you have any questions online, Luke, did we have any questions come in online?
We did. Someone was asking how to get associated with these initiatives.
Well, that's a great question. So the question, just to repeat, was how do you get associated with these initiatives? So probably the best recommendation I can make is to go to the QR code and send one of us an email or give us a call, because ultimately this personal interaction is the way we prefer and we feel we can add the most value. Ultimately, the checklist is a good place to start, and it starts to identify, have you done these set of activities? If you haven't, how could somebody like Charter help? That's probably another good suggestion. Anybody on the Charter team have any other, or Roland, do you have any other thoughts about kind of where to begin? Okay, So that's a great question. Hopefully that provides the answer. Any other questions in the room that myself or the team could answer for you? We could do it now or simply move to lunch. I know all the food's at the back. We're going to do the draw this afternoon, and the winner will be notified, and we'll post that into the chat room so that everybody knows whether they've won or not. But again, appreciate all of your sitting with us for the last hour and a little bit, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.